The great clock in the eastern tower of Sterling Manor struck a single, low note. 3:15 in the morning. Clara Whitmore pressed her back against the tall silk curtains of the ballroom and listened. Nothing. No footsteps in the marble corridor. No servants' voices from the kitchens below. Only the soft creak of an old house settling into the deep hours of the night. The gala had ended well past 2. She had watched the last of the carriages roll down the long gravel drive, the guests laughing beneath their feathered masks, the ladies gathering their velvet skirts against the cold. Now the great chandeliers hung dim above her, only a few candles left burning in their gilded arms, and the vast dance floor gleamed like still water in the moonlight. She could still hardly believe she had walked into this house. 6 months of planning, a stolen invitation, a borrowed silver mask, a gown of pale grey silk she had bought second-hand from a milliner in Cheapside and let out at the waist herself, sitting up 3 nights by candlelight with a needle. She had danced with 2 baronets and a colonel of the household guard, and none of them had known her name. That was the only thing that mattered, because tonight she meant to take back what her father had died trying to reclaim. Clara slipped from behind the curtain. The train of her gown whispered across the polished wood, and every whisper sounded, to her, like a shout. She kept her steps light, 12 paces from the eastern window, left at the ivory pillar, 6 paces more toward the great fireplace, then kneel. There, beneath the 3rd floorboard from the hearth, where the parquet had been carefully cut and rejoined so that only a person who knew the seam would ever find it. Her father had drawn her this map when she was 11 years old, on the back of a wine merchant's bill. She had memorized every line before she burned it, as he had asked. 20 years ago. She had never forgotten a single mark. She drew a slim brass key from the little embroidered purse at her wrist and slid it into a joint of the wood no thicker than a wheat straw. The mechanism turned with a small, dry click that made her hold her breath. The panel lifted. Inside lay a book. It was bound in dark red leather, worn soft at the corners, its spine tooled with a pattern of oak leaves. The Whitmore Ledger. Her grandfather's own hand had assembled it. Her father had guarded it. A merchant syndicate had taken it from her family the winter she turned 12, along with their name, their house, and her father's honor. He had died the following spring, believing every last page was lost to him. Clara lifted the ledger out with both hands, as if it was something living. Her eyes filled at once, and she pressed the leather to her cheek and let herself weep in the dark for the length of a breath. Silent tears. She could not risk sound. Then she slipped the ledger into the false lining of her gown, sewn deep against her ribs, closed the panel, and rose. Her hands were shaking. There was a small side table near the ballroom's northern wall, laid earlier for the gentlemen who had taken their brandy after the last dance. A single crystal decanter of claret still stood upon it, along with several unused glasses. She walked to it, slow and quiet, and poured herself a measure no larger than a thimble. She needed something to steady her before the long walk out. She lifted the glass and drank. The wine was old, warm on the tongue, and deeper than any she had tasted in her life, the kind of wine that only a great house could keep. She closed her eyes for the length of one breath and let herself feel, just for that instant, that her father was standing beside her. Somewhere high above her head, a voice spoke. "A fine year, that one. 1812. Clara did not scream. She was proud of that afterward. She only froze, the glass halfway to her lips, and lifted her eyes. The musicians' gallery ran along the southern wall of the ballroom, a long balcony of dark oak reached only by a hidden stair the players used during a ball. She had thought it empty. She had checked. It could not possibly. A figure moved out of the shadow between 2 carved pillars and rested his hands on the gallery rail. He was tall. He wore no coat, only a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow and a waistcoat of a deep midnight blue silk. His hair was dark and untidy, as if he had been running a hand through it. She could not see his eyes clearly, but she felt them upon her, quiet and steady, as if he had been standing there for a very long time indeed. "You did not choke on it," he said. "That, at least, tells me you have some experience with claret." Clara set the glass down on the little table, very carefully. The tiny click of crystal upon wood was the loudest sound she had ever made in her life. "I do not know you, sir," she said. Her voice came out even. She was surprised. "You do not," he tilted his head, "but you know this house. Very well, in fact. Better than most of the servants who have lived here 20 years. She said nothing. 12 paces from the eastern window, he said quietly. Left at the pillar, 6 more to the hearth, 3rd board from the fire. I confess I have watched a great many people walk across this floor tonight, madam, and not one of them counted their steps. Her throat closed. He came down the little stair at the end of the gallery without haste. She heard each footfall. When he stepped into the pale moonlight at the edge of the dance floor, she saw his face at last, and her stomach turned to ice. She knew him. From the portrait above the great fireplace, from every servant's whisper in Sterling Village these last 6 months, from the halfpenny papers that could not print his name enough. Duke Arthur Alderton, master of this house. He walked to within 3 paces of her, stopped, and bowed as though they had only just been introduced at the gala. The lock on that compartment, he said, straightening, has not been oiled in 8 years. I saw to it myself this afternoon. I unlatched it before the gala began. His mouth moved, though it was not quite a smile. I was rather curious, you see, who in all of England would come for what was inside. Clara's hand went, without her willing it, to the place at her ribs where the ledger lay hidden. The Duke's eyes followed the movement. Do sit down, madam, he said, very gently. I think we have a great deal to speak of before dawn. Clara did not sit. She stood very still in the middle of the ballroom floor, her hand pressed against her ribs, and waited for him to call for a footman, for the constable, for the magistrate at Sterling Village, whose jail she had walked past only that afternoon, and thought, not there, please God, not there. But the Duke only turned and walked toward one of the tall doors at the far end of the room. Come, he said, without looking back. The ballroom is cold at this hour, and I have a fire in my study. She did not move. He paused with his hand on the door. When he spoke again, his voice had a curious quiet in it. Madam, if I meant to give you to the law, I should have done it while you knelt by the hearth. I let you finish. That was true. Clara drew one long breath and followed him. They walked in silence through a long gallery lined with old paintings, past a great staircase of black oak, and down a shorter corridor to a door of carved walnut. He opened it and stood aside for her. She passed him with her chin up and her hands folded tightly in front of her, as though she were being received at court and not caught in the act of theft. The study was warm. A low fire burned in the grate, and 2 green leather chairs stood facing it. A tall clock ticked in one corner. The walls were dark with books. A tray had been set upon the low table between the chairs, tea in a silver pot, a rack of toast, a dish of butter, a pot of quince preserve, 2 cups already laid. Clara stopped in the doorway. You expected me, she said. I expected someone. The Duke crossed to the fire and stood with his back to it. I confess I did not expect a woman in grey silk who dances the quadrille rather well. Her cheeks burned. He had watched her at the gala then, from behind his mask. Very well. He gestured to the nearer chair. Please, the toast is still warm. My cook has strong feelings about toast. She sat, because her knees were beginning to fail her, and because a hot cup of tea in her hands would at least stop them shaking. He poured for her himself. She had never in her life been poured tea by a duke, and the small ordinariness of it undid her more than any shouting could have done. "Your name," he said, not a question. She looked into the cup. "Clara." "Clara what?" She raised her eyes to his. "You know what?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, as though a matter had been settled between them. "Whitmore," he said quietly. "I thought so. You have your father's brow." He crossed to the great desk beneath the window and drew out a small key from his waistcoat pocket. "I knew Henry Whitmore, madam. Not well. I was a boy when they took him. But I remember my own father saying, at his dinner table, that whatever the papers wrote, he did not believe a word of it." Clara set the cup down before she dropped it. The Duke unlocked a drawer and lifted out a slim leather folio. He brought it back to the fire and laid it on the table between them. "May I see the ledger?" he said. She hesitated only a breath, then she reached into the lining of her gown and drew it out and set it on the table beside his folio. Her hands were shaking again. She did not try to hide it. He did not touch the ledger. Instead, he opened his own folio and turned it toward her. "Look," he said. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, brown at the edges, the ink faded to the color of tea. It was a letter in a spidery hand, signed with a mark she did not know. She read it twice. Her breath grew shorter with each line. It was a private note from a merchant in Liverpool to a partner in Bristol, dated the winter her father had been arrested. It spoke of a matter with the Whitmore books. It spoke of the necessity of placing certain papers where the customs office should find them. It spoke of a sum owed to the gentleman who moved them, and named a syndicate she had heard whispered of all her life. The Ashcombe Trade Company, not the Aldertons, not the Duke's family at all. Clara pressed her hand hard against her mouth. "I have had that letter for 2 years, the Duke said quietly. "It came into my hands by an accident I shall tell you of another time. There are 3 more like it in that folio. Together they are enough to make an honest man ashamed, and not nearly enough to hang the guilty." She could not speak. "Your family's ledger," he went on, and now he did lay one long finger against the red leather, "is the other half. My people believe several of its pages have been cut away, the cipher pages, the ones your grandfather used to record which cargoes truly passed through which ports, and under whose name. Without those pages, the Ashcombe men cannot be touched. With them, madam, I think we could ruin them entirely." Clara found her voice. It came out very small. "You want my help? I want your skill." He met her eyes across the firelight. "I am a passable reader of accounts. I am no archivist. Your father was the finest in England, and he taught you. I have made inquiries, I know that much." "And in return?" "In return," he said, "I will clear your family's name in every paper that printed it foul, and I will see the house at Marden restored to you by summer, or I shall not sleep easy again." She stared at him. "Why?" she whispered. The Duke looked into the fire. "Because my father believed him," he said, "and because I am tired, madam, of a great many things." He held out his hand across the table. After a long moment, Clara took it. The steam train pulled out of the small country halt at 2:30 the next afternoon, and by 3 it was climbing the long green slopes toward the Midland Shires. Clara sat by the window of a private carriage lined in dark green velvet, her gloved hands folded in her lap, and watched the hedgerows blur past. She wore a traveling dress of plain brown wool, a modest bonnet, and a wedding ring of thin gold that did not belong to her. Her name for the journey was Mrs. Weston. The Duke, sitting across from her with a folded newspaper he had not yet opened, was Mr. Weston, a country solicitor bound for Oakhaven on the business of a coal lease. Neither of them had spoken since the guard had blown his whistle. She had not slept. She doubted he had either. There were shadows beneath his eyes, and he had shaved himself rather badly along the jaw, as though he had done it in a hurry and without help. She wondered where his valet was, and then decided she was better off not asking. The fewer people who knew where the Duke of Alderton had gone this week, the safer they both would be. The carriage rocked gently. Somewhere along the corridor, a porter was calling out that tea would be served at 4. "You have not touched the ledger since Sterling," Arthur said at last. He kept his voice low, though the doors at either end of the carriage were shut and locked. "I begin to think you do not trust the daylight." "I trust the daylight. I do not trust window glass and passing farmers." Clara reached down for the small leather case at her feet. "But we shall not learn a thing sitting on our hands, so." She drew out the red-bound ledger and set it on the small table between them. Then, from the lining of her traveling bag, a jeweler's loop her father had once used, and a soft square of chamois cloth. Arthur watched her hands. "You have done this before." "I have done nothing else, my whole life." She did not look up. "My father set me to reading old parish rolls when I was 7. He said the ink of a lie was always a different color to the ink of a truth if you looked long enough." Was he right? Almost always. She turned the ledger's pages carefully, one after another, rows of figures in a small, neat hand, names of ships, names of ports, Bristol, Whitby, Liverpool, Antwerp, Rouen. The cipher pages her grandfather had used to record what truly lay beneath the honest columns had been cut clean out. She could feel the ridge of them along the spine, where the binder's thread still held the stubs. She turned another page and stopped. "Bring the lamp closer, if you would." Arthur slid the small oil lamp along the table toward her. Its flame swayed with the rocking of the train. Clara held the loop steady above a blank margin at the foot of the page. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she drew in a small, sharp breath and turned the page toward him. "Look, there, where the paper thins." He leaned close. He was close enough that she could smell the plain soap he used and a faint trace of the tea he had drunk at breakfast. He smelled entirely ordinary for a duke, and she found she was grateful for it. "I see a mark," he said. "Faint, like a stain only. It is a watermark. When the paper was made, the mold pressed a design into the wet pulp. In daylight, most eyes would miss it. Against a lamp held so, you can read the maker." She turned the ledger a fraction, and the small, pale shape swam into clarity beneath the flame. 3 linked rings above a set of tiny letters. Arthur's face changed. "Cadwell and Sons," he said. "Papermakers. Oakhaven." "Then my grandfather bought his ledger paper from a mill in Oakhaven." "Not only that." Arthur sat back. His voice had gone very quiet. "Cadwell and Sons closed their public trade 40 years ago. They kept a single private customer thereafter, a private vault beneath the old Trade Guild Library off Merchants Row. Any paper stamped with that mark and used after the 61st is guild paper. Yours was made in 1868. I would swear to it." Clara did the sums in her head. "Then the cipher pages were not cut in some London back room by a common thief." He set his hand flat on the table. "They were cut here, and they were carried to that vault, because that is where papers of that mark are kept. That is the whole point of the mark." She looked at him. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because," he said, "the Aldertons have kept a box in that vault since my grandfather's day. It is where we lodge the deeds nobody is meant to see." He gave a small, tired smile. "I have been down there myself. Twice." Clara let the loop rest. Outside the carriage window, the fields had turned to low black hills, and a thread of dark smoke rose above them where the first chimneys of the Midland works were beginning to show. Oakhaven, another 80 miles up the line, would be a city of iron and glass and long gray rain. "So we are going to walk into the vault of the men who arranged my father's ruin," she said, "and open their locked drawers and take back what they cut from my grandfather's book." "Yes." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds," said Arthur, "that I am an Alderton, and I have not visited my own box in some years, and it is entirely natural I should wish to. And I shall be bringing with me my wife, who is very fond of libraries." She looked at him a long moment. "Mr. Weston." "Mrs. Weston." She closed the ledger and slid it back into her case and drew the case close against her feet. Outside, the smoke thickened. The train ran on. The Trade Guild Library of Oakhaven stood at the corner of Merchants Row and Foundry Lane, a heavy grey building with tall iron gates and a stone lion on either side of the steps. Rain had been falling since midday. By the time Clara and Arthur climbed down from a hired hansom at 6:30, the gutters were running black with soot. Clara wore a dark green walking dress and a fur-trimmed cloak she had not been able to afford in 15 years. Arthur had bought it that afternoon at a draper's on the high street without so much as glancing at the price. She had wanted to protest, and had not, because Mrs. Weston, wife of a country solicitor with Midland coal interests, would not have blinked at a fur trim. The head librarian met them himself in the marble hall. He was a thin, stooped man, with a very fine silver watch chain across his waistcoat and small round spectacles that caught the gaslight. Mr. Halloran. He bowed rather deeply when Arthur presented his card, and Clara understood, with a small cold twist, that the name on the card was not Weston at all. The Duke had produced it from a different pocket entirely. "Your Grace," Halloran said, "we were not expecting—" No, quite unannounced, I know. My apologies." Arthur's voice had changed. It was warmer now, easier, the voice of a man used to being cheerfully forgiven for any small inconvenience he might cause. "I am up on private business, and my wife has never seen a proper subscription library. I promised her the guild before we left London. I did not promise her supper, unfortunately, so we have not much time." Halloran bowed again. Of course. And the private vaults. I should like to look in on the family box, yes. Only a moment. And Mrs. Alderton would very much like to see the antiquarian room, if it is not too much trouble." "No trouble in the world." The reading room was empty at that hour, but for a single elderly clergyman asleep behind a copy of the Illustrated London News. Halloran led them past the long oak tables, past a great glass case of parish registers, and through a low door at the back of the room. Beyond the door, a narrow spiral of iron stairs wound down into cold stone. Clara counted the steps as they went. 32. Her father had taught her to count steps in strange houses. He had said that when a person meant to leave a place in a hurry, the counting had been done for them already. At the foot of the stairs lay a long vaulted corridor lit by hissing gas jets set in wall brackets. On either side stood rows of heavy oak drawers, each with a small brass number plate. The air smelled of dust and old paper, and, faintly, of leather polish. Halloran unlocked a small side chamber and swung the door open. "The antiquarian room, madam. The Cadwell papers are in the 3rd and 4th cabinets from the window. If you should require anything at all—" "You are very kind," Clara said. She smiled at him the way her mother had once smiled at bishops. "I shall lose an hour in here, I fear." "Then I shall lose an hour with his grace at his box, and we shall none of us be missed." Halloran turned to Arthur. "Sir, if you would follow me. Number 41, I believe." Arthur caught Clara's eye for a single beat as he passed. She read the whole message in it. "Quick as you can." She waited until the sound of their voices had faded down the corridor. Then she shut the door behind her, turned the small brass bolt, and set to work. The Cadwell cabinets were not locked. Guild papers, after all, were not kept from guild men. She pulled open the 3rd drawer, then the 4th, and began to lift out the heavy folios one by one. Sales records, rag purchases, the great mill books of 1868, bound in dark buckram. She held each one up to the gas jet by its spine and shook it, gently, the way her father had taught her. A page hidden inside another page will always sit a little proud of the block. A page slipped into a binding will always thicken the spine at that place by a hair. The 7th volume gave under her hand. She laid it on the reading table and prized the cover open along its inside seam. The end paper, marbled in red and blue, had been lifted and glued back down. Not badly, but not the work of the original binder either. She wet the corner with the tip of her tongue, waited 3 breaths, and eased the paper up. Beneath it lay 4 folded sheets. Her grandfather's hand. She knew it before she had unfolded the first. The small, precise numerals, the little private mark he had made at the head of every cipher page, a wren with its tail turned up. She had traced that wren with her finger, sitting on his knee. Her eyes stung. She blinked hard and kept moving. She folded the sheets flat against her ribs, beneath the corset boning where the ledger had ridden the night before. She smoothed the end paper back into place. She returned the volume to the drawer. She closed the cabinet. She unbolted the door. She stepped out into the corridor with her most tired, most pleasant smile arranged upon her face. Arthur was already coming toward her, Halloran at his elbow. He was thanking the librarian for his time. His eyes flicked to hers and read the answer in them at once. They were halfway up the spiral stair when Halloran, some paces behind, called up after them. "Your Grace, a moment. There is a gentleman at the front desk asking after any Alderton party this evening. He would not give his name." Arthur's hand closed lightly around Clara's elbow. "Ah," he said. "Then we had better not keep him waiting at the front." He turned her, without hurry, toward a small side door. The side door opened onto a service passage that smelled of damp coal and lamp oil. Arthur closed it behind them without a sound and slid the small iron bolt. "Walk," he said. "Do not run. Running is remembered." Clara walked. Her heart was beating so loudly in her ears that she was half certain the passage walls were beating with it. The pages sat warm against her ribs. She could feel the faint edge of them shift each time she breathed. The passage let them out into a narrow yard behind the library, where 2 great rain barrels stood beneath a broken drain pipe. Beyond the yard, an alley. Beyond the alley, the low grey roofs of the warehouse quarter, and past those, the river. "The docks," Arthur said. "Half a mile, perhaps a little more." "On foot?" "On foot. No cab of ours crosses Merchant's Row tonight." He drew her cloak's hood up over her hair with one careful hand, and then he set off along the alley at the pace of a man out for an evening stroll with his wife. Clara matched him. The rain had thickened. The lamps of Oakhaven burned yellow in the mist, each one wearing a fat halo, and the flagstones underfoot ran with black water. They passed a public house whose windows glowed warm and gold, and a knot of dockmen outside it who did not look up. They passed a boy selling roasted chestnuts from a tin brazier. They passed a woman in a shawl arguing with a costermonger over the price of pears. "Do not look behind us," Arthur said, quietly, at her ear. "Are they there?" "2, perhaps 3. They came out of the front door as we came out of the back." Clara did not turn her head. She only tightened her grip on his arm and let herself lean into him a little more, the way a tired wife might lean upon her husband on a long evening. Arthur pressed her hand where it lay in the crook of his elbow. He did it with the ease of a man who had done it 100 times, though he had done it, she supposed, exactly never. They turned left at a lamp-post, then right into a lane so narrow the eaves of the houses almost touched above their heads. Arthur seemed to know every corner. She wondered when he had walked these streets, and in what company, and decided again that she was better off not knowing. The river opened before them all at once. The docks of Oakhaven at that hour were still busy in their slow way. Cranes creaked. Bargemen called to one another across the water in a dialect Clara could barely follow. The great gas lamps along the wharves threw long yellow bars across the black water. Somewhere out on the current, a bell was ringing. Arthur drew her past a row of chandlers' shops, past a coil of rope taller than a man, past a heap of empty tea chests stacked against a warehouse wall. He stopped at last at the third pier from the mouth of a small inlet, where a low steam launch sat rocking gently at its moorings. Her paintwork was black and unlovely. Her funnel gave off a thin, patient plume. A bargeman in an oiled coat stood on the small forward deck. "Mr. Weston," he said. It was not a question.
"Mr. Weston it is. Cast off, if you please. My wife has had rather a long day."
The bargeman took Clara's hand and helped her down into the small cabin without a second glance. Arthur followed. The mooring lines slipped free. The little launch's engine gave a soft, thick chug beneath their feet, and the pier began, without hurry, to slide away. Clara sank onto the padded bench in the cabin and let out a breath she felt she had been holding since the reading room. Through the small round port, she watched the wharf. 2 men in dark coats had reached the top of the pier. They stood there a long moment, looking about them, one of them with a lantern raised. The launch was already 20 yards out into the current. 30. 40. The lantern searched the water and did not find them. Arthur sat down opposite her and, for the first time since the ballroom, allowed himself to close his eyes.
"That," he said, "was closer than I should have liked."
"You knew there would be watchers."
"I hoped there would not."
He opened his eyes again. They were very tired. "I have been careless. Somebody knew our names before we walked in." Clara did not answer. She was already unfastening the small hooks at the side of her bodice and drawing out the 4 folded sheets and laying them flat upon the little cabin table under the swaying oil lamp. "Then let us make the risk worth its taking," she said. She flattened the first sheet with the side of her hand. Her grandfather's wren looked up at her from the corner of it. She swallowed once, hard, and set to work. The cipher was one she had learned as a girl, a running key drawn from the King James Bible, the book of Proverbs, the chapter and verse marked at the head of each column by a small number Arthur would never have noticed. She had a pocket Bible in her traveling bag. Arthur fetched it without being asked. She worked in silence for the better part of an hour. Arthur did not speak. He only watched the pages fill, in her small, neat hand on the reverse of the sheets, with the true names behind the false ones. Ships, cargoes, bribes, customs officers paid at Bristol, warehouses rented under other men's names in Liverpool. And then, halfway down the 3rd page, a name she had to write twice before she believed her own pen. She set the quill down. She did not look up at once. When she did, her face had gone entirely white. "Arthur," he heard the change in her voice. He set the Bible down. "The man behind the Ashcombe Syndicate," Clara said. "The man whose name sits at the head of every entry from the winter of '68 onward." "Yes." "It is Mr. Redgrave." Arthur's face did not move. "My chief business manager," he said, very quietly. "For 11 years." "Yes." The launch chugged on into the dark. The cottage at Lakecrest sat half a mile back from the water, at the end of a rutted lane that only a local would know. It was low and white, with a slate roof gone soft with moss, and a small stable at the side where the launch's bargemen had put up their 2 hired horses without a word. A woman called Mrs. Pell came out of the kitchen door to meet them, took one look at Arthur, and said only, "Your Grace, the blue room is aired. There is soup." Clara understood at once that Mrs. Pell had been meeting Arthur off boats at odd hours for a very long time. They ate the soup at a scrubbed pine table by the kitchen fire. Neither of them spoke of Redgrave. Not yet. There is a particular kind of shock that a person must sit with for an hour before he can say a word about it, and Clara knew the shape of it well. She had worn it herself for 20 years. Afterwards, Mrs. Pell showed her upstairs to a small room with a white counterpane and a jug of hot water. Clara washed her face, unpinned her hair, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment with her hands in her lap. She had thought that when at last she held her grandfather's cipher pages in her own hand, she would weep. She did not. She was too tired to weep. She was, she found, only very quietly angry. She went back downstairs. Arthur had cleared the kitchen table. He had spread out the 4 decoded sheets, weighted at each corner with a salt cellar, a candlestick, a pepper pot, and a book. Beside them lay a great heap of papers he had drawn from a locked chest in the parlor. Ledgers of his own estate, bank drafts, shipping schedules, letters from Redgrave in a firm, slanted hand that Clara had already begun to hate on sight. "You have kept everything," she said. "I keep everything. It is a habit my father beat into me." He glanced up. He had rolled his sleeves again. There was ink already on the side of his hand. "Sit. I have been laying them out by year. I want to know when he began." She sat. They worked past midnight. Clara read her grandfather's decoded columns aloud, softly, and Arthur ran his finger down his own account books at the matching dates. A shipment of cotton bales out of Liverpool in the March of '69, a cargo the Ashcombe men had booked under a false Bristol name, a payment into Redgrave's private account the following week from a bank in Rouen. Every entry matched. Every entry. By the second hour, they had stopped being surprised. By the third, they had begun to see the shape. "He was already doing it before he came to me," Arthur said. He sat back at last and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Look, this entry, 1867. He was in my father's employ then, as understeward. He was already moving Ashcombe cargoes through our warehouses at Bristol in my father's name and taking his cut off the top. Then when your father died, he simply kept moving up." Arthur's voice was flat. "And I let him. I made him chief manager myself 4 years ago, because he was the only man in the household who could read a shipping return without falling asleep at it. My father trusted him, I trusted him, my tenants trust him, my banks trust him. Every man of business in London who does not know my face knows his." Clara looked at him steadily across the table. "That is why he ruined my father." "Yes. Because my father would have noticed. My father was writing to the Bristol Customs House that autumn. I have his letters at home. He had already begun to ask questions about the Ashcombe manifests. He did not know Redgrave from a stranger in the street, but Redgrave knew him. Redgrave knew that if a Whitmore looked long enough at any Ashcombe book, the whole thing would come down. So he moved first," Arthur said. "He arranged for a set of forged papers to be slipped into your father's own ledger. He arranged for a customs officer at Bristol to find them. He arranged for your family's name to appear in every paper in the kingdom before your father could speak a word in his own defense. And when my father died," Clara said, "he still had the ledger. He kept it. He hid it in your ballroom floor. Why?" Arthur was quiet a long moment. "Because he had not finished with it," he said. "The cipher pages had been cut and lodged in the guild vault safe. The rest of the book, still coded, still dangerous to him if a clever archivist ever saw it, he kept close, in a house he already had the run of. Beneath the feet of a family he had already begun to bleed. My father was ill by then. I was a boy of 17. Redgrave came and went in Sterling Manor as he pleased. Who would ever think to lift a floorboard in a ballroom no one danced in for a decade after my mother died?" Clara let out a slow breath. "He hid it where he could watch it." "Yes. And the gala. The gala was mine." Arthur met her eyes. "I have known for some months that something in that room did not sit right. I did not know what. I did not know who. I only knew that when I sent out the invitations, I ought also to unlock the compartment I had found beneath the 3rd floorboard from the hearth and see who came for what was inside." Clara said, very quietly, "You were not sure it would be me?" "I was sure it would be someone Redgrave had wronged. I hoped it would be someone I could help." A small, weary smile. "I did not dare hope it would be Henry Whitmore's daughter." She looked down at the papers. They had, between them, everything now. The cipher pages, the matching accounts, the letters, the dates, the bank drafts, the proof of the estate at Marden that ought to have come to her at her father's death, still standing empty these 20 years, held in trust by a firm of solicitors Redgrave himself had appointed. She lifted her eyes. Then we go to London. Yes, and we finish him in a room he cannot walk out of. Arthur poured them each a small glass of brandy from a decanter on the sideboard. He set hers before her. To Marden, he said. To my father, Clara answered. The kitchen fire burned low. They came into London at first light. The train from the north set them down at Euston in a wash of steam and coal smoke, and Arthur handed Clara out onto the platform beneath a grey sky that was already thickening into rain. He had wired ahead from Lake Crest to a small hotel in a quiet square off the Strand, and a closed carriage was waiting for them at the station gate. He had not sent word to Sterling House. He had not sent word to a single one of his own people in the city. Not one. If Redgrave has been reading my correspondence for 11 years, he had said the night before, over the last of the brandy, then he has been reading it this week as well. We tell no one until we tell everyone. At the hotel, he took 2 rooms in the name of Weston, a private parlor between them. He had the trunks carried up himself and tipped the porter with a coin that made the man bow twice. By 8 o'clock, Clara was at the parlor table with the cipher pages, the estate papers, the Bristol letters, and Arthur's own account books spread out before her, and a fresh pot of coffee at her elbow. She had slept perhaps 4 hours on the train. She did not feel it. There is a kind of tiredness that burns clean, and she was burning with it now. Arthur came in at past, dressed for the city, dark coat, silver-gray waistcoat, a stiff white collar. He looked, for the first time since the ballroom, entirely a duke. I have sent the note, he said. To the Exchange. To Sir Ambrose Follett, the senior trustee. I have said that a matter has arisen touching my northern accounts, and that I require an emergency sitting of the board this afternoon at 2, in the small boardroom on the 2nd floor. I have said it is delicate. I have said it must include the chief managers of every house that clears through my warehouses, in order that the matter may be settled in 1 meeting, rather than in 20. And Redgrave? Redgrave will receive his own note by 10, from Sir Ambrose's clerk, not from me. It will say that a routine audit of the Alderton books is to be laid before the trustees this afternoon, and that his attendance is required to answer any small questions of accounting that may arise. Routine. That is the word Sir Ambrose has been asked to use. A small, mirthless smile. Redgrave will not be pleased to be summoned at short notice, but he will not be alarmed. He audits 3 houses a year. He believes he is very good at it. He is very good at it. Clara nodded slowly. She turned one of the cipher pages beneath her hand and did not look up. He will bring men with him. To the Exchange, to the board of the Grand Exchange, at a session called by Follett himself. No, he will bring a clerk and a leather case, and he will walk in through the front doors of the building at 1:45, like any other gentleman of business. You are certain? I have known him 11 years, Arthur said quietly. He believes I am a good man and a lazy one. He believes I will never look at a book he has not already prepared for me. Every reading I have ever done of an Alderton account, I have done with his hand at my elbow. He does not expect the Duke of Alderton to have spent the last 3 nights on a steam launch and in a country kitchen. He expects the Duke of Alderton to arrive at the boardroom at 2 o'clock with a small headache and a fondness for sherry. Clara set down her pen. Then we must give him nothing else, until the doors close. Nothing else. She rose. She crossed to the small looking-glass above the parlor fire and looked at the woman in it for a long moment. Pale, tired, a little thinner than she had been 6 months ago, her hair pinned plainly. 20 years of being a nobody, and today, at 2 o'clock, she was to walk into the boardroom of the Grand Exchange of London and lay her grandfather's book upon the table before the men who ran the trade of half the country. She turned to Arthur. I shall need a proper dress. There is one coming at 11, a modiste on Bond Street, my mother's dressmaker. I sent to her last night. Grey silk and a mourning brooch of my mother's, if you will wear it. I want you to walk into that room as a Whitmore, not as a Weston. Her throat closed. She had to look away for a moment. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet." They spent the next 3 hours at the table. Arthur read out the cipher entries in his low, steady voice, and Clara laid the matching Alderton account beside each one and clipped them together with small brass pins. Bristol, 67. Liverpool, 69. Antwerp, 71. Every page of the ledger tied to every page of his own books, and every payment tied by date and by sum to a bank draft signed in Redgrave's own hand. At 11, the dress came. At 12:30, they ate a light lunch neither of them tasted. At 1, Arthur went down and called for the carriage. At 1:15, Clara came down the hotel stairs in dove-grey silk, with a small black mourning brooch pinned at her throat. And Arthur, who had seen a great many women in a great many gowns in his life, forgot for a moment where they were going. He offered her his arm. She took it. The carriage rolled east along the Strand and turned into Threadneedle Street at 10 minutes to 2. The Grand Exchange rose before them, all pale stone and tall pillars, its great doors already open, its clerks already going up and down its steps with folios beneath their arms. Somewhere inside that building, in a small oak-paneled room on the second floor, a man in a black coat was already taking his seat, laying a leather case at his feet, and arranging a pleasant, patient smile upon his face. Clara drew one breath. She let it out. "After you, my lady," Arthur said quietly. They climbed the steps together. The boardroom of the Grand Exchange smelled of beeswax and old paper. It was a long, oak-paneled room with a great table down the middle, 12 high-backed chairs about it, and a portrait of some long-dead trustee above the marble fireplace. A green baize cloth had been laid the length of the table. 2 silver water jugs stood at either end. The gaslight was low, for the shutters had been closed against the afternoon rain. Sir Ambrose Follett, a lean grey man of 60 with a scholar's stoop, rose from the head of the table as Arthur came in. "Alderton, you are punctual. I would not waste the board's time." 10 of the trustees were already seated. Clara knew none of them by sight. She knew them all by name. She had spent an hour on the train writing them down from memory, from her father's old correspondence. 2 bankers, a shipping magnate, a retired judge, a cotton man out of Manchester. The rest were merchants of the older sort, men who had inherited their father's seats and read their columns of figures the way their wives read their prayer books. And Redgrave. He sat halfway down the left side of the table, a leather case at his feet, and he rose as Arthur entered with a polite, easy smile. He was a broad man of 50, ruddy-faced, side-whiskered, with small, quick eyes and the sort of thick, capable hands that reassure a duke. He had been reassuring Arthur for 11 years. His eyes went to Clara. They held there half a second longer than they ought. "Your Grace," he said, "I was not told you were bringing a lady." "Mrs. Whitmore is not a lady I am bringing," Arthur said mildly. "She is a witness the board has requested." The word Whitmore dropped into the room like a coin onto a marble floor. 2 of the older merchants looked up sharply. Sir Ambrose, who had been prepared, only bowed to Clara and gestured her to the empty seat at Arthur's right hand. Redgrave's smile did not change, but she saw his shoulders set beneath his coat, and she saw the small, careful way he did not look at her again as she sat down. "Gentlemen," Sir Ambrose said, "His Grace has requested this sitting in order to lay before us certain matters concerning the Alderton warehouses at Bristol and Liverpool, and certain irregularities that touch upon the wider trade of this exchange. He has asked that Mr. Redgrave, as chief business manager to the Alderton house these 11 years, be present to answer any questions of accounting that may arise. Mr. Redgrave, you consent?" "Of course," Redgrave said. His voice was warm. He had a very good voice. "I am always at the board's service. I confess, however, that I am at some disadvantage. His Grace has said nothing to me of this matter, and I have brought only the current quarter's books." "That will not be required," Arthur said. "The books before us today are not the current quarters." He nodded to Clara. She stood. She had thought at the hotel that her hands would shake. They did not. She set her leather folio on the green baize before her and unbuckled it with steady fingers. She drew out the first page. The wren watched her from its corner. "Gentlemen," she said. Her voice carried. She had not known it would. "My name is Clara Whitmore. My father was Henry Whitmore of Marden. In the winter of 1868, my father was tried in absentia for the smuggling of goods through the port of Bristol under false manifests. He died the following spring. His name has stood in the papers of this country as a criminal for 20 years. The room did not move. "He was not a criminal," Clara said. "The manifests laid against him at Bristol were forged. They were laid in his ledger by a man in the pay of the Ashcombe Trade Company, and they were found there by a customs officer likewise in that company's pay. This is not opinion. It is set out in a private letter from a Liverpool merchant to a Bristol partner, dated the November of that year. His Grace holds the letter now. He will pass it round." Arthur slid the letter down the table. The retired judge picked it up first. He read it. He passed it on without a word. "My grandfather," Clara went on, "kept a ledger of his true accounts in a cipher of his own devising. That ledger was taken from our house the week my father was arrested. It was thereafter hidden in the ballroom of Sterling Manor, beneath a floorboard whose location was known only to the man who had hidden it. Its cipher pages, meanwhile, were cut from the book and lodged in a private vault beneath the Trade Guild Library at Oakhaven. His Grace and I recovered the ledger last week. We recovered the cipher pages this Wednesday. I decoded them on Thursday evening." She laid the first decoded sheet upon the green baize. "This is a shipment of cotton bales out of Liverpool, March of '69, manifested under the name of a Bristol firm that did not exist, cleared through the Alderton warehouse, paid, at completion, into a private account in Rouen." She laid down the second. "This is the corresponding entry in the Alderton house books for the same week. His Grace has brought the original. You will see the shipment recorded. You will not see the payment. The payment does not appear in any Alderton book at all." She laid down the third, a bank draft, Rouen, March the 22nd, 1869, signed at the foot in a firm, slanted hand. "This is the draft," Clara said. "The signature, gentlemen, is Mr. Redgrave's." The room, at last, moved. The cotton man from Manchester stood halfway up in his chair. Sir Ambrose reached for the draft and drew it across the baize with 2 fingers. The retired judge held it under the gas jet and looked at it for a long moment, and then he set it down and looked at Redgrave. Redgrave laughed. It was a small, easy laugh. "Gentlemen, this is a signature. It is a signature that may be copied. Any clerk could." "There are 311 of them," Clara said, "across 20 years, in 4 countries, to 4 different banks, in the same hand. I have matched them all." Redgrave stopped laughing. Sir Ambrose folded his hands on the baize. "Mr. Redgrave, have you anything further to say?" Redgrave looked at Arthur. For the first time in 11 years, he looked at Arthur the way a man looks at a door he cannot walk out of. Arthur did not look back at him. He was looking at Clara. Sir Ambrose lifted a small brass bell from the baize beside him and rang it once. The doors at the far end of the boardroom opened. 6 days later, the sun was setting over Sterling Manor. It came in long copper bars through the tall west windows of the library, and it lit the dust that hung in the warm, still air above the shelves, and it turned the spines of 10,000 books to a soft red gold. Somewhere below in the kitchens, a maid was singing. The house had been singing quietly to itself all week. It was the sound of a place that had woken up. Clara stood on the 3rd rung of a tall oak ladder, a soft cloth in one hand and a folio of court rolls in the other, and set the folio into its proper place upon the shelf. She had spent the morning at the long refectory table, sorting the last of the Alderton family papers by year. She had spent the afternoon shelving them. Her hair was pinned up loosely. She had rolled the cuffs of her plain gray dress to the elbow. There was a small streak of shelf dust across her cheekbone that she did not know was there. The door at the far end of the library opened, and Arthur came in. He had ridden out that morning to see the tenants at the home farm. He was still in his riding boots. He carried a small, folded packet of papers under one arm, and in his other hand, 2 glasses and a dusty bottle of the same claret she had sipped in the ballroom. He stopped a moment inside the door and only looked at her. "You have taken it as your own already," he said. "I have not. I have only put the 17th century back with the 17th century. Your grandfather's clerk shelved by author. I do not know what he was thinking." Neither did he, I suspect. Clara came down the ladder. She wiped her hands on the cloth. She saw the papers under his arm and knew what they were, and something small and tight in her chest let go at last. He set the bottle down on the long table. He set the glasses beside it. He laid the packet flat. "Marden," he said quietly. "The deeds. The trust dissolved yesterday afternoon. The estate stands in your name from the 1st of the month. The tenants have been written to. Mr. Pargeter, the steward there, has held the place clean these 20 years without knowing why. He is a good man. He wept, I am told, when the solicitor read him the letter." Clara did not trust her voice for a moment. "And my father's name." "Struck from every register in which it was blackened. The Bristol Customs House has issued a correction under seal. The Times will carry it Monday. So will 3 other papers. Sir Ambrose has seen to it himself. He asked me to tell you that he knew your father once, at a dinner in the year 64, and that he liked him." She had to sit down. She sat at the long table. Arthur did not fuss over her. He only drew out the chair opposite and sat as well, and pushed one of the glasses across, and poured them each a measure of the claret. The evening light lay across the table between them, warm as a hand. "Redgrave," she said after a moment. "I have not asked."
He is at Newgate. He will be tried in the autumn. The Ashcombe partners at Liverpool were taken up on Wednesday, the Bristol men on Thursday. There are 11 of them in all. The papers you decoded will be laid before the court in your hand, with your seal beside mine." A small, tired smile. "You have made a good deal of work for a good many barristers." "I have made a good deal of work for myself." "You have." She looked at him across the glass. She had known him 9 days. "Arthur." "Yes." "Why did you not simply take the ledger in the ballroom that night and walk me out to the constable and be done with it? You had the cipher pages within your reach at Oakhaven. You knew Redgrave. You had the letter. Any London barrister with the letter and the pages could have hanged him without me at all." Arthur turned his glass between his fingers. "I could have done all of that," he said. "Yes, I could have had him at Newgate a fortnight ago, without ever climbing the gallery stair." "Then why?" He did not answer at once. He looked past her to the long west windows where the light was going. "Because a barrister could have hanged Redgrave," he said. "Only a Whitmore could clear a Whitmore. The court would have taken my word and buried your father a second time in a footnote to a verdict. I did not want your father in a footnote." She could not speak. "And because," he said more quietly, "I had heard of Henry Whitmore's daughter once from a professor at Oxford who had corresponded with her about a 15th century parish roll. He said she was the finest young archivist in England and that no one would ever employ her because of a name that was not her fault. I remembered it. When I unlatched the compartment beneath the 3rd board, I confess I had already half hoped it would be you." Clara set her glass down very carefully. She did not weep. She had done all her weeping earlier in the week, alone in the blue room at the top of the house, when Mrs. Pell had brought her the first copy of the correction from the Times and left her to it. She was quite done with weeping now. She said, "Then I had better sign the papers, Mr. Weston." He laughed under his breath. He drew a pen from the small silver stand at the end of the table. He drew the deeds toward her and turned them the right way about.
She signed at the foot of the first page. She signed at the foot of the second. She signed at the foot of the third, and pushed them back to him, and he set his own hand at the witness line and blotted it with the small square of chamois she had used a fortnight ago on the train. He lifted his glass. "To your father," he said. "To yours," Clara answered. "He believed him." They touched glasses. The sound was very small in the great quiet room. Outside, the sun slipped at last below the line of the elms. Neither of them rose to close the shutters.